Well, everyone, let's go and take a look at the M2 Mac Mini and see how this particular Mac holds up in 2025. Now, there's a couple of things to keep in mind here for the most part. And what I can definitely tell you is that this Mac Mini, which just came out not that long ago, is still easily one of my most favorite types of devices out there. It is such a solid Mac. I think it's still completely worth buying for sure. There might be some other better alternatives that we'll talk about in a second, but this Mac Mini is very solid. And if you want to pick up this Mac or some other Macs that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description below. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this Mac Mini, the whole concept behind a Mac Mini, right, is a smaller, cheaper type of Mac. These are Macs that are very good, they're very fast. They give you kind of the bare essentials to kind of start going through and actually using this type of Mac. They're not the most beautiful thing, they're not the most colorful things, but they're very, very good looking devices that I actually enjoy. And I do think if you are going to go through and pick up a device, these things are very solid. Now, this one comes out in one configuration in terms of coloring, so it just comes out in a silver model, which I always like, but I do feel like I missed that like space gray, like darker one that they made. That was inside of the last Intel 2018 Mac Mini. I thought that one was really nice. Within this Mac though, you're getting pretty standard type of I/O. So on the front side, you're not really getting anything super crazy, just like a light that shows it's on. Nothing on the sides. On the back side, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So on the back of the Mac, you're basically getting 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports if you have the M2 model, or 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports if you have the M2 Pro model. So depending on which model you have, you're going to be getting more or less ports, which is interesting because that never really used to be the case. But now it seems like if you're going through and getting the more expensive spec'd out model, you are getting more ports. I always wonder if they're going to do this for MacBooks as well. You're also going to be getting 2 USB-A ports inside of this Mac Mini, an HDMI port, and a gigabit Ethernet port as well. So that is in and of itself a really, really cool thing to basically have here. And that is some really nice I/O to have inside of a device too. So this in and of itself does kind of make this Mac, I think, a little bit of a better kind of pickup in some ways than the M1 Mac Mini because of the additional ports that you're getting. But here's the craziest thing, right? With the previous Mac Mini, the M1 model, the M1 MacBook Pro, and the M1 MacBook Air, you were only able to go through and get a Mac that basically supports up to 2 different displays. So these displays were the M2 model. But if you got the M2 Pro model, then you could go for 3 displays. This was a really, really big thing in my personal opinion, because before it was you could only dock it up to 1 display. And that was something that was so annoying and so frustrating to me, because if you wanted to go through and use additional displays on this, you couldn't really do that. Like you had to go through and just use that one particular display. And like I said, that was really annoying. Apple went through and they, I guess, fixed it here. So you could dock it up to 2 different displays, which I actually like a lot. So this one is also better in that regard too, which I actually think is a really, really nice thing that they ended up doing here. Now, on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here is the price tag. So this Mac, when it first came out, it wasn't the most expensive thing of all time. It was a pretty affordable type of Mac, which in and of itself, again, was a really nice thing to basically have. Being able to go through and get a Mac like this that is going to be this nice and this capable, I think is a really, really nice thing in and of itself. On the flip side though, because of the newer M4 Mac Mini that just came out, that one is kind of a better type of Mac for the most part, as it should be, because that is kind of like a, it's a better Mac. But with the M4 Mac Mini, when I look at it, it does give you a little bit more functionality, especially with those USB-C ports on the front side. Like being able to go through and have a Mac that's going to be giving you that type of capability, I think is really nice. Again, it's not the end all be all, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but that could be one thing that you might end up seeing from that particular situation. So from that side, kind of keep that in mind when, since we're kind of on the task of like talking about both these side by side, because the M4 Mac Mini is the latest and greatest, like I said, it is going to be giving you just more capability. But if you're not really worried about that, if it's not that big of a deal, I think an M2 Mac Mini can still be a really good option when it comes down to it. And on top of that, depending on which particular model you're getting, you might actually be able to get more USB-C ports inside of or just more USB ports in general inside of your M2 Mac Mini than the M4 Mac Mini, because the M4 Mac Mini doesn't even have USB-A ports. So that right there is going to be a pretty big thing to kind of keep in mind there from that side when it comes down to it. So when it comes down to those things, I don't want to just make this a comparison video, but I would still say the M2 Mac Mini does have some stuff up its sleeves from that side as well. Now, this Mac Mini supports Apple Intelligence, which is great. Not really too many people use it. But when it comes down to the power behind this Mac, this is where things get interesting. So the M2 Mac Mini at its maxed out model can get up to 12 cores in its CPU, it can get up to 19 cores in its GPU, it can give you 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it can give you 8 terabytes of storage. So this type of power is really, really nice, right? It's a really good amount of power to have. For starters, I have an M1 Pro MacBook Pro, and it has, I think, 16 gigabytes of RAM or something. And I feel like this Mac is still very fast. It performs so well. And if you were to get a comparable Mac Mini, I'm sure that one would also be very fast and very, very powerful. But with these M2 ones, if you got a maxed out M2 Mac Mini, that would be a very fast Mac, but it would also be very expensive. So it's kind of this tricky situation where it's like, you can, get a better Mac Mini, but it is going to cost you more money. Would it just make more sense to go through and just buy something like a current generation, M4 Mac Mini with a little bit of a higher, specification in the beginning with, than going through and buying like a current generation or past generation M2 Mac Mini? I still feel like the power of this Mac Mini is very fast. No matter really what you're going to do with it, you're going to be having a really, really good fast time with it. And that's always just one of those big things to kind of keep in mind here, because you're going to be able to go through and pick up a phone inside of the Mac Mini that's going to be giving you a very, very good time and a very good experience with. So I do think from that side, if you're going to go through and pick up a Mac, that is easily one of the better types of Macs that you can go ahead and buy, because it's so small and just so capable. Now on the other side, I do think if you're going to go through and pick up something like let's just say an M4 Mac Mini, this is going to be a little bit of a different type of, experience. For me personally, I think an M4 Mac Mini is one of those types of devices that, it probably will end up giving you just an overall better experience. I feel like that one would be the one that I would look at as being the more optimal one in most ways. But at the same time, I think an M2 Mac Mini is really one of those types of devices where, it still does a really good job at performance, it does a really good job at power. And I do think it is one of those things where I look at it and I'm like just a big fan of that type of Mac when it comes down to it. Now, with that being said, there are a few things and a few key takeaways that I remember with the M2 Mac Mini. Number one, it is cheaper. In the used market, it's a much cheaper Mac now, but you do have to still buy most accessories with it. You still have to buy things like a keyboard and a mouse, an HDMI cord, or like a Thunderbolt cord, which Thunderbolt cords are expensive. Or you're going to have to go through and, buy the monitor as well if you don't already have one. If you already have all those existing things, then you won't have to worry about it at all. But if you don't have those things, well, you're going to have to go through and you're going to have to basically buy them. So that is going to be one other thing you're going to have to go through and basically buy when it comes down to it. That can be kind of an annoying thing when it comes down to it from that side. And that is in and of itself another really, really important thing to kind of keep in mind when it comes down to it. Now, when it comes down to the other side, I will tell you with the M4 Mac Mini, if you want to go and spend a little bit more money, I do think it does make a lot of sense to go and buy something like an M4 Mac Mini. I feel like those ones are very good. But with the M2 Mac Mini, this one's a very good one. It has a lot of value, a lot of capability. And I do think that is a really powerful one when it comes down to it. But I do feel like the M4 Mac Mini and the newer ones, especially like if you want to buy an iMac, those ones might be the better ones for the most part, just because they come with the accessories already. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.